Apex has had an interesting last 12 months. From a ton of quality of life changes, to the controversial Battle Pass rework, to the new map E-District, I feel like everyone has a lot of opinions on what's been going on, as well as what they think will happen to the future of Apex. A lot of my peers are speaking out, changing or adding new games into their content, or just straight up leaving or retiring out of the scene entirely, so I figured I'd add my opinion to the pile. The state of Apex, the future of Apex, and where I'm at as a creator, personally. I plan on sharing a lot of my feedback directly with Respawn, and once you hear what my thoughts are, I want you guys to tell me what you'd like to see from Apex, or I guess the Titanfall universe as a whole, so that I may present it directly to the folks over at the dev team. Anyways, to get to the point, I think the last 12 months were about what you could reasonably expect, a mixed bag. The year didn't start cleanly on a new season, but we were in the middle of Season Ignite, Season 19 for those who, like me, don't remember the names. If you're foggy on the details, we got a new legend, Conduit, a ton of changes to Storm Point that greatly improved the map, as well as two banger LTMs, the Post Malone 3 Strikes one and the Final Fantasy VII Buster Sword events. Whew, I could say one of the best seasons for content that we've had in a while. The rest of the season was also pretty exciting, though maybe sometimes for the wrong reasons. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of amazing positive additions to the quality of life to the game, but we'll get to that shortly. You see, while I think every live service game every year has its community pushing back against monetization, Apex specifically has had some pretty major controversies with how they monetize the game. Aside from the increased release of universal heirlooms and recolors, there was the Battle Pass change of Season 22. I don't want to get into the specifics because by this point it's old news and there's tons of videos about what happened and how Respawn semi-reverted it. At the time, people were really upset about the pricing and the value they were getting from the 60 level Battle Passes as consumers. But for me, I guess my concern was a little bit different. Before I continue, I'm not an industry expert or video game dev, and I have zero experience about actually working behind the scenes and running the business and financial side of things. That being said though, my best guess is that I felt like this was a sign that Respawn realized they needed to / wanted to keep up the revenue growth from Apex on a smaller player base by increasing the amount of monetization. And coming off of COVID, where everyone was playing, watching, consuming video game content, I could understand that post-pandemic hangover. After all, my own channel saw some pretty meteoric growth and success, both view-wise and financially. I'm not kidding, guys. It was a time of growth in the first couple of years in Apex's life cycle. And couple that with the quarantine and everyone being home, I feel like the video game industry saw a massive surge when many other industries may have struggled. Anyways, it's very obvious that Respawn wanted to continue that lovely financial trajectory because, well, it's a business at the end of the day. But to be fair, there has been a ton of monetization being pushed lately, but honestly, I'd argue I first started noticing it when they increased the number of collection events each season. But more specifically, when they did that Peacekeeper Battle Pass recolor as a collection event heirloom. Oh boy. Anyways, to circle all this back, while people were pretty upset with the increased monetization from a consumer standpoint, I was more worried about it from a different angle. Apex has a player population problem. There's not enough influx of new players and returning players coming in to check out the game. If you can imagine a wide base of a funnel, I think Apex's influx of new players is just not as big anymore. And conversely, for the sake of my illustration, as you progress down, the funnel narrows as it reflects more and more invested players, who are fewer but more loyal. And I feel like without the strong influx of new players or returning players, that starts to affect nearly every aspect of the game experience. On the financial side, I think that's why you start to see more monetization from Respawn. They're really trying to min-max the player base they currently have. And so I think Apex is in a tough spot where there isn't enough of an influx and it's relying on the player base it does have, which is admittedly decreasing. Now, granted, Respawn has done a great job with vastly improving quality of life to Apex, most notably a pretty big decrease in cheaters, finally. But earlier this year, we got the Legend upgrade and armor system, as well as a really nice rework to Lifeline, an OG legend that's been around since the beginning. And I loved the Akimbo Mozam's MP 2020. And yes, while the Akimbo edition and Lifeline reworks weren't technically new legends or new guns, as a veteran player, it definitely felt like it in a way. We even got OG Apex back, which was a nice little treat, as well as relic weapons, basically past versions of current guns that have been removed or may not possible anymore. Even the introduction of the revival mechanic in pubs was really nice. I feel like the Apex community was really clamoring for a 3 Strikes-esque gameplay style, and Revival offered that. From my point of view, all these things are sick. But therein lies the problem. While someone like me, 6,000 hours into the game, could welcome and appreciate the Lifeline rework and cool reworks to guns, I don't know if it's enough to pull a new player into Apex Legends, or even someone who has quit a while back. back. I'm just thinking for myself, I quit playing Overwatch years ago, and while Overwatch 2 was a letdown, it at very least piqued my interest because of the new heroes and new maps they released since launch. I definitely wouldn't have even considered going back to play Overwatch if they, for example, hypothetically just reworked an old hero or redid all the maps. I'm not saying those things aren't worth doing. I think quality of life changes like what Apex is doing are critical and would appeal to veterans of the game, but I'm not really convinced that those things would appeal to a new player or even people who have quit the game altogether. I've met a ton of people in real life who've played Apex, and even the person who cuts my hair, I remember the first time when I met him a few years ago, he was actually playing Apex on his salon TV, and he sounded pretty excited and passionate about the game at the time. To this day, we're still good friends, and I still get my hair trimmed with him a couple times a year, but when I ask him about Apex, he's just completely moved on from the game and laments on how sweaty the game's player base has become. I think Apex has done a really good job at making the game very competitive. While it's fundamentally a battle royale, a decent amount of the RNG elements have been smoothed out. In fact, I feel like lately it's become less and less like a BR, at least in the traditional sense. The remaining player base is also very good. I feel like the Apex community has become quite a bit more competitive and sweaty. Obviously, I think there's still a decent portion of players who take this game more casually, but I think many more of those casual players have quit the game by this point. Apex can be a really difficult game to get into. By the way, something I've always kind of rolled my eyes at would be when people will sort of shit on casual players, both in-game and also from an attitude standpoint. I feel like that mentality drove a lot of the casual player base away, and I think it's a bit short-sighted because these sweats don't realize that for a game to survive, you do need a healthy base of newer casual players continually flowing in and checking out the game. And over time, as those new players get more invested in the game and stick around, it is only a benefit for the player population on all levels of skill. Some people don't realize that if they chase away the casual player base, the game's population would inevitably shrink. Lobbies would get sweatier and sweatier as the people who do remain are just the longtime veterans of the game. I think something I hope for the next 12 months would be a lot of investment from Respawn's side to make Apex more attractive to new or returning players and casual players, and hopefully to also retain them. What do I think Respawn can do? I think it needs to be a combination of improving on the current content cycle and introduce something completely new to the Titanfall universe. First of all, I think they need to look at what wins players back who have quit and interest brand new eyeballs to the game. This is all stuff that has been done before, so if I had to guess, it would likely be more new legends and new guns, along with some really awesome cinematics. Lately, those three things have really slowed down, and I think it's hurting the hype around the game. I also think having really interesting LTMs where there are collabs done would be great too, like the Post Malone or Final Fantasy event from 2023. I'm not convinced Heirloom events really move the needle anymore and get people really excited to check out the game. Actually, I would guess it's a bit of a diminishing returns with packing in a ton of collection events. And this is something I'm genuinely curious about. What's the thought process on Respawn's end with putting out so many heirlooms? Now, some of you may be going like, her candy clearly is to milk us for more money. And while that may be true, I feel like surely by this point, they're seeing the negative feedback and bad player sentiment. Or, and maybe this is even worse, but also just straight up apathy. People not even caring about heirlooms anymore. Even for me, I'm someone who've collected heirlooms as part of my YouTube business. The views on heirloom videos really don't perform well these days. And I myself, as much as I liked heirlooms, am having a hard time keeping up my own interest in getting them. There are just so many of them, so often. I feel like it's overwhelming and the frequency is diluting the specialness of them. I would have much preferred the old school way of just one heirloom a season and that heirloom being specialized to a specific legend. What next? Well, I also think the solo queue experience needs to be fixed. It's pretty difficult to solo in Apex, whether that's in pubs or in ranked. Now, I have zero clue on how to make it better outside of providing incentives to solo queue, but also possibly having a queue where only solos can play in. But then again, I'm not really sure how feasible that is to split up the player base even more. The solo queue experience is pretty rough either way, and I think it should be a top priority to figure out some solution, as I'd imagine it turn away new players and returning players who are just checking out the game. Also, I think Respawn can be too locked in on how they see their own game. It's become too narrow. I've seen some suggestions from creators to have Respawn release a map editor, sort of like a way for people to create custom game modes, like a sandbox type thing. I do think that could work, possibly, but I feel like the tool would have to be very polished and open-ended to really allow creativity to shine. I'm not entirely sure if it would encourage people who don't play Apex to come and check out the custom game modes made by players though. I personally would also love more additions to loot. I know Respawn probably wants to keep the loot table clean and not cluttered, but if there's just some way to continually introduce new utility items, different kinds of heals, new grenades, I think that would really keep things fresh for the current player base. Something I really loved about this year that Respawn added was the legend skill trees, because I felt like it was a really clever way of deepening the way people can play Apex. Honestly, I wouldn't mind them fleshing that out even more, especially as people sort of default to one skill build over time. And prepare yourselves, you guys really want my hot take opinion? Well, I'd love to see a whole new way to play Apex. If there's just some way we could take the universe, the guns, the characters into a whole new genre, that'd be amazing. Some of you guys might groan, but I've always had a soft spot for extraction shooters, so I wouldn't mind a Titanfall universe open world extraction shooter. I absolutely love the increased stakes that you get from extraction games, which is something that I feel like Battle Royale games have lost. Wow, okay, Candy, you know, I stopped watching after you said the word extraction. Okay, for you guys rolling your eyes, it doesn't have to be an extraction shooter, but you guys get my point. I'm just saying I would love some sort of fundamental shakeup. Since people have been pointing to Marvel Rivals and Fortnite's Ballistic, I could say yes, maybe a smaller scale 5v5 hero shooter version of Apex would be a good idea. Though some of you guys out there would make the argument that Respawn did try that. Anyone remember Arenas? Funny enough, while recording some gameplay footage for this video, I ran into these two randoms who were excitedly talking about their previous match, and I realized something about them that I hadn't seen in quite a while.
Which one?
Peacemaker.
Oh yeah, those are great.
Crushed a couple fools with that.
I feel like it's way better to use that without zooming in than to zoom in.
Yeah, I know. I didn't zoom in on the last. And also, I used my special ability. I could see people through walls at that point. So the last guy was like crouched down behind this thing. I like came up around his side. He had no idea I was there, and I was just like, boom.
Which character were you again?
What's his name? The like robot guy. You know who I'm talking about, though. No, the other like demonic robot guy.
Oh, I don't know. I don't have him.
Maybe it was just my SBMM tanking after not playing Apex for a bit, but I generally don't run into newer players like this. As the conversation went on, it turns out that the Revenant had quit Apex about a year and a half ago and went off to play other games like New World Eternum. And it was actually fascinating for me to hear them talk about Apex from that perspective. To hear their genuine enjoyment and satisfaction of the game was really refreshing. Quite the contrast from the usual stuff you'd hear from longtime veterans of Apex. My aim here was really rusty, but we ended up clearing our landing spot, and I decided at this point to ask them a few questions about their Apex experience, hoping to maybe figure out something that could help Apex regain more players like them. You guys play this game a lot?
I used to play it a lot.
What made you come back to check it out?
My friend said he was gonna play it. I said, alright. And then if you don't play it a lot, it's like other people are way better than you. If you don't play it often, you're like,
right, you gotta keep up. Hearing these guys talk about how they see Apex was really eye-opening. Clearly they don't play Apex as much as someone like me does, which by the way probably is a good thing, but I do think they had some pretty good insight on how Respawn could win players back. One of them mentioned they were checking out the game because their friend wanted to play it, and that really reminded me of how social multiplayer games are for me. From my early Dota days to when I moved on to DayZ to Dirty Bomb and then Overwatch and then later PUBG and then finally Apex with so many games in between, I've always played much more of these games because my friends were playing. And it made me think, maybe Respawn should do an event that encourages veteran players who main Apex to bring along friends who either never played Apex before or maybe ex-players. Perhaps it could be some sort of tag team battle pass where there are really high quality matching skins or special heirlooms that could only be completed with a newer player doing it with you. Some of you may be wondering, Candy, but what about the player numbers? The short answer? Well, I don't think Apex is dead. For those of you guys out there and say the game is dead, you haven't seen what a real dead game looks like. The player numbers declining isn't ideal, but while it may or may not be fixable, I think it's a very normal thing that happens. This is, after all, a 6-year-old battle royale. On Steam, 80k to 100k concurrence, while from a far cry from its peak, is respectable, and that's just counting Steam numbers. On the flip side, could the numbers be better? Absolutely. I miss the old days of seeing Apex just surging in popularity. It was a great time with tons of new eyeballs, not only on the game, but on my YouTube channel as well. I think the declining player population does, shall we say, super effective damage on a battle royale game that needs 60 player lobbies across trios, duos, the different ranks, and then you have mixtape, and then multiply that number of playlists and lobbies across a bunch of different regions. That is a lot of queues to fill. I definitely hope to see that the player count stabilizes and trends upwards in the next 12 months, and I really hope Respawn takes this as a wake-up call and focuses a lot of attention on the new and returning player experience. Of course, I don't think it'll be easy, especially with people just naturally moving on onto other shiny shiny FPS titles as they come out. But I genuinely think that Respawn could take the foot off the gas with focusing so much on monetization and really think about what would bring back more players to check out the game in the first place. At this point, you're probably wondering what I think of my peers who have quit the game or mixed in other games into their content. I mean, I can understand why from a career standpoint or even a mental standpoint. Doing anything for 6 years straight can be really tiring. I myself have been mixing in other games on my secret side channel and I've been really enjoying it. I think sometimes, and we saw this a lot in the Apex scene, gamers get too wrapped up in the competitiveness and forget to actually enjoy gaming. Sure, everyone has different reasons for playing video games, and I think some people love that competitive side of Apex, but for me, I've realized I really enjoy gaming to feel and experience, to laugh and have fun with friends. And if that makes me a filthy casual, then fine. For what it's worth, as a creator in the Apex space who's been doing it from the start, my content has changed quite a bit from the beginning where I would cover patch notes or just post gameplay to nowadays where it's a mix of challenges and silly experiments. I think I've covered just about everything I'd want to. Looking at it, I feel like I've experienced all I care to experience in Apex. I've seen the high highs, I've seen the low lows. So at this point, I genuinely hope that Respawn really rethinks what the Apex and Titanfall franchise will look like in the future. I'm not sure what the next 12 months will be like for me in Apex, and I'd love your feedback on what types of videos you guys would like to see from me. But I don't think I'm really going anywhere because not many FPS games out there interest me enough to want to convert this channel to a channel that mains another game. Though to be fair, I am doing variety content on a second channel, and that's been extremely fun and refreshing for me. I think I've rediscovered how much I enjoy just experiencing new games, specifically the ones in the exploration survival genre. At the end of the day, that's really what I love doing the most, enjoying a game for the fun of it, laughing with my friends, and coming across new experiences. The last thing on my mind at this point is sweating out for the next 20 bomb or trying to min-max my movement or aim mechanics. That just doesn't really interest me at this point. At some point, I'll be sharing your feedback directly with Respawn, by the way. And while I'm sure I'll get a ton of fix the audio or oh my god, fix the servers comments, I'm actually looking for suggestions that are much more out there. If the sky was the limit, what would you want Respawn to do next to really revitalize the Titanfall universe? Anyways, thanks for listening to my rant. Maybe you guys will think I'm off base on some of this stuff, but this is just my personal perspective and I would love to hear what you think.